All right. Baruch Hashem, we're on page 98 of this beautiful book, The Concise Code of Jewish Law, and we're up to the principle of Shavut Tishvut, or as I say it, Shvus Tishvus. Do you see that, Mordechai? Do you mind reading it?
Okay, the principle of Shavut Tishvut.
Right.
When two independent rabbinic prohibitions coincide in one act, the act is termed a Shavut Tishvut.
Meaning it's a double rabbinic prohibition. So he gives an example.
For example,
yeah,
it is rabbinically prohibited for a Jew to ask a non-Jew to violate Shabbat for the Jew's benefit. It is also rabbinically prohibited to reheat cooked food by placing it on an open fire. Asking a non-Jew to reheat cooked food by placing it on an open fire would thereby constitute a Shavut Tishvut. Generally, you cannot perform a Shavut Tishvut, but there are notable exceptions.
So the exception, thank you. So basically, a Shavut Tishvut is a double rabbinic prohibition. He gives an example: somebody who is cooking on an open fire. You can't ask a non-Jew to cook for you. You can't ask a non-Jew to do a prohibition for you, and you're not allowed to reheat food on an open fire. But both of them are rabbinic prohibitions. So you can't ask a non-Jew to reheat food for you on an open fire, but that's just generally. But now there are exceptions, and he lists a few of the exceptions. One exception is a person who is sick, not life-threatening, but he's sick. So there you can rely upon a shvut dishvut. Another is if there's a great loss of money. And the third example is if it's for the sake of a mitzvah. Shvut dishvut b'makom mitzvah. So or also for a communal for a communal need. So as an example, let's say you want to adjust the heating in a communal setting. So you can ask a non-Jew to do the heating because not asking a non-Jew to do something is only rabbinically prohibited. And presumably raising the temperature on the thermostat is presumably only rabbinic. And since it's for a communal need, usually people are lenient there. Okay, now we're up to the next one. Performing an act in a different manner. So this one is called, colloquially, we refer to this as a shinui. Do you want to read, Aviva?
Sure.
Okay.
As already indicated, performing a malacha in a backhanded manner.
Or you could skip the Hebrew or in
an unusual way, reclassifies the act as a shavut, and you would not be liable for performing the malacha. But the act is rabbinically prohibited.
So basically, this is what we call a shinui. If you don't do it in the typical manner, you do it in an atypical manner. Let's say, for example, you typically turn on a light switch with your right hand. But instead of turning on with your right hand, you turn on with your nose or your elbow. Let's say your elbow. That's a more common. So that would seem that's what's called a shinui, and that makes something only rabbinically prohibited. So now, if it's something that's already rabbinically prohibited, and you do this shinui, that's the rabbinic prohibition upon a rabbinic prohibition. And so that's a shvut tishvut. And so if it's for the purpose of a mitzvah or a loss of money or for somebody who's slightly sick, then it would be permissible. So basically,
I know that even for saving a life, it's not necessary, but if you can, you should use the shinui instead of fully breaking.
So that's really a very big question. If it's going to slow you down, then definitely you should not do that. But if it's all the same, then there's a question. We're going to hopefully come to that in this book, whether Shabbos is, when it comes to pikuach nefesh, whether Shabbos is what's called hutra or dechuya. If it's hutra, it's completely allowed, and you don't have to worry about shinui. But if Shabbos is just dechuya, if it's pushed off for saving a life, then to the extent that you can mitigate it, you mitigate it. So that becomes a question. That's a question, which hopefully you'll take up. What's here is rationale. The rationale for shinui as a mitigating factor is that when you do it differently, you don't have to fear that you're going to come to do the biblical violation.
Mm.
However, you cannot use the principle of shinui to permit all rabbinic prohibitions. They do not apply to certain decrees. Okay, now it's up the next paragraph, which is the prohibition of marit ayin. Here, Arya, you read that one. The general rabbinic.
The general rabbinic prohibition from our science, the prohibition of an act because of the appearance of wrongdoing.
So basically, that means that you can't do something. Marit ayin. What's the reason why you can't do it? Is because, typically speaking,
Other Jews and
people might see you doing it and think that that is permitted. So let's say you go into McDonald's and somebody else, you're just going in to go to the bathroom, but you're in, let's say, Jerusalem, and this happens to be a non-kosher McDonald's. I don't know what the status of the McDonald's. Sometimes when I was there was some non-kosher McDonald's and some kosher ones.
Yeah.
So you go into the one that's not kosher, people see you going in with dressed like a religious Jew, they're going to assume that it's kosher and they'll also go in to eat from it. So that's the problem of Marasayan. Let's read what he says. An apparent reason for this restriction.
the apparent reason for this restriction is aside from the obligation to present an appearance of upright conduct and to avoid it, profaning the name of Hashem in compliance with the
Whatever. Skip.
is that even permissible actions could be misconstrued and might lead others to actually violate law. Therefore, if your garments become soaked in water, you may not spread them out to dry for fear that people will suspect you of having laundered.
Yeah, one. Right, exactly. We'll keep going. Hold on.
Moratorium, although rabbinic prohibition applies with regard to both the biblical and the prohibition. However, while the prohibition you have that wrongdoing is subject to Marsign, it is forbidden even in private. In the case of a rabbinic prohibition, it is only forbidden in public.
Okay, so this is a key point. Let's read this one. Maris Ayin, even though it's just a rabbinic prohibition, it applies even to other rabbinic prohibitions.
What does that mean?
He's going to say, well, in the case of a biblical prohibition, and acted as the appearance of wrongdoing and is subject to Maris Ayin, is forbidden even in private. In the case of rabbinic prohibition, it's only forbidden in public. So if people will see you doing this, and if the concern is that the people might then come to do a biblical prohibition, then it's going to be prohibited in public and private. But if the concern is that then we'll only do a rabbinic prohibition, then it's only going to be a problem in public if you do the act in public, but not in private.
How people like private, like has it
Like in your own room. Are you allowed to do something in your own room, which would typically be prohibited because of Maris Ayin? Let's say.
from our side until public?
No, so the point is that that's not true. Now, Maris Ayin, if something is prohibited because of Maris Ayin, and the concern is that people might come to violate a biblical prohibition, then it's even prohibited in your own room to do it, even though nobody would see you. But if they would see you, a good example of this is let's say somebody comes in from Israel where they keep 2 days, where they keep 1 day of Yontif, and they come here, and then everybody else keeps 2 days, but your practice is 1 day. And now you want to go to the movies on the second day of Yontif. So you can't go because it's Maris Ayin. Well, but what about in your own room? In your own bedroom, can you go on your phone and start scrolling? So since that's just a rabbinic prohibition, then in your own room, according to this, it would be permitted. But let's see what he says here in the footnote. And it says acts prohibited because of maris ayin. Chazal have we seen differentiate between biblical and rabbinic with prohibitions with regard to their own enactments. Therefore, in cases when the act is subject to maris ayin to protect an isur, it is forbidden even in private. However, if it is protecting a rabbinic prohibition, they were stringent in the prohibiting the act in public, but not in private. The restriction in private, even in one's innermost chamber, applies to acts that are customarily performed in public, but not to acts that are normally performed in private. He said, well, let me just, it's applied to actions which are usually prohibited, and as an exception, someone is performing the act in a permitted manner. Therefore, you are not forbidden to perform an act that is manifestly permissible merely because some people might mistakenly believe it to be prohibited. Okay, so I don't know, it's a little bit tricky, but if people, basically, the rule of thumb is that people will assume, but if it's absolutely permitted, you don't have to be worried that people will make that mistake. Sometimes people have to educate themselves. So that's why it's a little tricky. And you can always feel comfortable asking, but this gets a little tricky. Okay, so anyway, this is the story about today, and we're now up to the malachot, but we'll say that for Shabbos afternoon. We'll study the malacha of plowing. This is so good. This book is he lays it out in such a clear manner, so it's so beautiful.